Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our webinar on accommodating autism in the classroom. As a reminder, this webinar is being recorded for your convenience so that you are able to play it at staff meetings, or you can upload it into your Keen and Safe Schools online training module and assign this course out to any of your classroom or special education staff. So we are very excited this morning to have Kate McDonald with us, and Kate's been working with children and families dealing with autism for over 10 years as a private therapist, consultant, and advocate. Her strength is that she is also a parent of a 14-year-old child with autism, and this gives her a very unique professional perspective on autism. She was the founding president of the Autism Society of the Mid-South, and she has a master's degree in special education with an emphasis in autism spectrum disorders. So with that, Kate, I am going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Kathy. I am Kate McDonald, and I'll be presenting this webinar. This is a short time period for this amount of information, so this is going to be an overview, but I hope you'll be able to learn something and take away a new idea or strategy from our time here together today. So let's begin. Autism is the fastest growing developmental disability. According to the CDC, about 1 in every 88 children in the United States has been identified with an autism spectrum disorder. 5 times more common in boys than girls, and there is no one known cause and no cure for autism. The prevalence is increasing, and why is that? In 2002, statistics were 1 in every 150 children had autism. In 2012, that is 1 in every 88, and there are 2 dimensions to this increase. The first is a better understanding, awareness, and diagnosing of the disorder. Some children in years past who may have been just thought of as quirky or odd are now being correctly diagnosed as having autism. And years ago, also, some cases of mental retardation or childhood schizophrenia are today better understood and recognized as autism spectrum disorder. More parents and professionals are aware of the disorder and seeking further evaluation. The second dimension, other environmental and genetic factors. Most scientists are in agreement that there are other factors environmentally and genetically. They just have not pinpointed what those are at this time. So today, both public and private schools are seeing more and more children with autism in their classrooms. Is this a good thing? My answer today to you is yes, it is a good thing, because 25 years ago, an autism diagnosis also most likely came with a recommendation to institutionalize the child. And I, as a parent of a child with autism, and I know many teachers and other autism professionals, can attest to the fact that we know many children with autism can and do make great strides overcoming many of their difficulties, and you can be part of their success. What is autism? Autism is not a psychiatric disorder, it is not just bad behavior, and it is not a result of poor parenting. Autism is a neurodevelopmental disorder which affects the brain. In fact, studies have shown that there are different parts of a brain of a person who has autism that are more or less active than the brain of a neurotypical person. Autism is also referred to as Autism Spectrum Disorder because it affects each person differently. Some are mildly affected, while others may be severely impaired, nonverbal, with an intellectual disability as well. For the purposes of this webinar, I'm going to be talking about children who are on the mild to moderate end of the spectrum, those that would be in the mainstream classroom for some or all of the school day. The 3 common characteristics that are necessary for an autism diagnosis are, number 1, impairment in communication. And this characteristic oftentimes is the first one that a parent notices that there might be something wrong with their child. around 18 months or 2 years, or sometimes even earlier, it may 15 months, the child is not learning language, not acquiring language, or if they have acquired some words, they lose them. So this is most likely the first tip-off to a parent that there might be something wrong with their child. Number 2, impairment in social interactions. Eye contact is a social interaction. Looking when somebody calls your name is a social interaction. Obviously, relationships with other people are social interactions. Children with autism, again, very young ones, they might stop responding to their name. You might call their name 5, 10, 20 times, and that child will not turn around and respond to you. And some parents even think that their young child is possibly going deaf, and they'll have their hearing checked out, only to find out that the hearing is fine. So this is another red flag, a lack of eye contact, a lack of responding to their name for parents that their child might have autism. Repetitive behaviors and or restrictive interests. Those are repetitive behaviors, like a child with a toy or a child who likes to maybe open and close doors. Not all that unusual for a young child, but a young child with autism, that behavior might be repeated an hour or longer. They might be perfectly happy opening and closing a door for an hour. They might need to flick the same piece of carpet continuously. Restrictive interests, that means for a young child, they might like a certain cartoon or a certain show. They might love Barney, and they're very interested in that. The child with autism, their level of interest goes well above and beyond a typical child. They have to watch Barney every day. When they watch it, they want to continue watching it for hours on end. Their toys have to be Barney toys. The level of excitement that they show when Barney comes on, they're not just excited like any other child. They are over-the-top excited. Okay, so those are the 3 common characteristics for an autism diagnosis. What is Asperger's syndrome? I have this up here because I think there's a lot of confusion still about the differences between Asperger's and autism. The term autism is derived from the Greek word autos, meaning self. In the 1940s, an American physician, Dr. Leo Kanner, used the term autism to describe the withdrawn behavior of a group of children he was studying. Around the same time, in another part of the world, an Austrian pediatrician, Dr. Hans Asperger, observed children in his practice who also had great difficulties with socialization. So during that time, they were distinctly different diagnoses and different words for them, but over time it's evolved really into the same thing. So, but the difference is Asperger's is considered to be a high-functioning form of autism, whereas children with autism have a lack of language or speech delay, which becomes noticeable, like I said, around 18 months. Children with Asperger's do not. They have language. Although they don't have a speech delay, people with Asperger's may have difficulty controlling the volume of their speech. They may have little or too much inflection in their voice, and they can have great difficulty carrying on normal conversations with others. So although they don't have the speech delay, they certainly have a communication issue. And then they also have the other 2 components of an autism diagnosis. What else do I need to know about a person with autism? As part of their autism, they might also have skewed sensory systems, delays in processing information, high levels of anxiety, attention issues, and other medical and biological issues. So what do all these mean? Skewed sensory systems, that means that their smell, taste, hearing, touch, sight, those can either be hyper-effective, more than a typical person's, or hypo-effective, which is less than a typical person's. And what that means is that everyday factors in the classroom or in their environment that don't affect other children at all. For example, fire drills, loud, chaotic cafeterias, the smell of the cafeteria food, doors banging, bright lights, all these things can cause extreme discomfort for a kid with autism. And you need to take these into consideration during the day and understand that the world they're living in, the environment they're thrust into every day can be very overwhelming to them, both physically and emotionally. Delays in processing information. As I said, their hearing, their thought processing, their speaking an answer, that's all in confusion. That's all being disrupted throughout the day, right? So they have usually delays in when they're going to answer you, how they're going to answer you. They're processing the information. It's going to take them longer. High levels of anxiety, I can tell you from raising my own child with autism that she is very anxious. There's always anxiety, especially when she's around people. And this can make her physically uncomfortable and manifest itself in a variety of different behaviors. Attention issues. I hear so many parents say that my child has autism and ADD and ADHD. And really, attention, either hyper-focused attention or not enough attention, is really a component of autism. Other medical and biological issues. These can be very serious. Many children with autism have gastrointestinal problems, which present much discomfort and pain throughout the day. They can have serious sleep issues. They can go without sleep. They can wake up numerous times during the night, which obviously could be contributing to negative behaviors during the day. How are things different today? In the 1970s, let's think about our classrooms then. The desks were in uniform rows. The memorization of facts. You memorize things in the classroom, you memorize things at home, you spit out those facts. Individual projects all the time. You worked on projects at home, you worked at them at school, usually always by yourself. You stayed in one room. You stayed in one classroom with one teacher. In fact, I think I even ate lunch in my classroom when I was in grade school. Let's talk about how classrooms are today. Desks are in group setup, either at tables or in U-shapes or a cluster of desks put together. There are projects, so many projects. I know with 3 middle schoolers, I have, it seems like endless projects. Group presentations, a lot of the projects are group projects, and then they have to go into class and present them as a group, and everybody has to collaborate and take turns and do their own part, and yet function as a group. And, of course, the children are switching classrooms with multiple teachers throughout the day. To most typical children, these changes have probably made school more interesting and less stagnant. But for a child on the spectrum, it presents chaos and discomfort. Children with autism, they do well with order and structure. Okay, so all these things today make it much more uncomfortable for them. Social awkwardness is only increased by the fact that the child is sitting at a group table and not by themselves. Projects and collaborating require good communication and social skills. Switching classes and having lockers can be extremely disruptive and stressful on a child with autism. And these are just some facts to keep in mind when you're thinking about a child with autism at your school and in your classroom, that the nature and style of our class and schools equals stress and anxiety for kids on the spectrum. So let's talk some general tips for the classroom. And I'm going to go over these. I'm going to show you examples of these in the next few slides. But number one, visual schedules. A lot of you probably already have these, especially for younger children. These are posted in the front of the classroom, and they allow the child to see and know what's coming next. So again, children with autism have a lot of anxiety, and they do better with organization and routine. And so it reduces anxiety for them to see what their day is going to look like every day. And you can give a child an individual schedule for them to keep on their own desk. A whoops card. Whoops cards are used in conjunction with the schedules, and these cards allow notice to the student for unpredictable events, which we all have those during our school days, fire drills, speakers. So when a child comes in school, if you know there's some other event, so you can take your whoops card, take a music card, put in the whoops card and say, you know, we're supposed to have music right now, but whoops, we have a firefighter come speak to us today. But it's okay because it's right here on the schedule. Planners, these allow for older children to know their schedule. And then break cards, and these allow students passes for going to a sensory room if your school is fortunate enough to have one, or to a counselor's office during times of stress. And let's look at those. The first, visual schedule. That's obviously for a younger child, but it just shows both in words and pictures what's going on during the day and what's happening next. The whoops card, like I said, you can just take one of those out if something's not going to happen that day. Put in the whoops card. So that means you don't have to write specifically what's going to happen, but you can say, whoops, we had this instead, but it's on your schedule here, it's okay. Now, some events throughout the day are unpredictable, like a fire drill or something else that happens that you're not going to be able to predict. I would have the whoops card handy always, at all times. And so if something happens spur of the moment and the schedule's going to get messed, flash that whoops card to your child and say, whoops, we're having a fire drill, but, it's okay. I told you about it right now, and we can put this on your schedule maybe later, or, it's going to be okay. Whoops, we knew something might happen, and here's what's going on, so it's okay. This is a weekly planner, obviously for maybe a middle or high school student, and obviously for a student that would be able to read, but you can modify them depending on the particular student. These planners not only have the daily schedule, but they have very detailed information. They need to include notations for, in between classes, go to locker and get whatever, don't forget your flute for music, things like that. They're very detailed. And the break cards, they can look like whatever you want them to, but these are some examples. They need to be available to your student in their possession to use when they're feeling stressed or overwhelmed. These cards are to help you prevent problem behavior. Okay, so if you have been able to learn what signs your student is showing to indicate that they might be stressed out or going to have a meltdown soon, maybe they're wringing their hand or desk or something, you need to have this process worked out with the student ahead of time. Johnny, do you need a break? Or, do you need to use your break card? And that signifies to Johnny, I need to use my card. I need to get out of the room for a minute or two, even if I'm going to step outside and take some deep breaths, go to the bathroom, get a drink at the water fountain. If you have a functioning sensory room and their process, a system for using the sensory room, you can use your break card for that. Possibly go to the counselor's office and use your break card for that. But these, and you might be able to teach the student themselves when they're feeling overwhelmed and be able to use their break card accordingly to help themselves calm down and prevent problem behavior. Again, it's only a 2, 3, 4, 5 minute kind of thing, but it's helpful. All right, general tips for the classroom. Speak in a normal voice to the child. During times of stress, use a quieter voice. And why I say this is children with autism can sometimes get very easily overwhelmed. And I think typically when it seems someone isn't understanding something, I think it's natural for a person to start talking a little louder, possibly repeating themselves, and this generally is not helping the child with autism. Don't always insist on eye contact, especially during stressful times. There's a real school on eye contact, and some people always insist on eye contact from kids on the spectrum. I don't, and that is if you talk with kids with autism, and I've read many books written by adults with autism, they refer back to the skewed sensory systems again. They will say, I can't listen to you and look at you at the same time. So do you want me to listen, which probably that's what you want, or do you want me to look at you? So during times of stress, don't always insist on that. I would be very selective and sensitive as far as demanding eye contact. Lastly, allow extra time for a child to process and then answer a question. And we went over that previously, that their brain to mouth connection is maybe not as fast as someone else's. So just allow a little bit of extra time for them to answer. Academic considerations. I'm sure many of you know most of these. Testing in a separate quiet room, more testing time, allowing for breaks, fewer items per line or page. And what that means is that if you're asking the rest of the class 50 questions, possibly cutting theirs down. That could maybe be overwhelming and putting them over the edge. Maybe cut it down to 30 questions or 25 questions. And if your student with autism answers all 25 correctly, then obviously they know their material. Fewer items per line or page. reading questions to the child, reading instructions to the child, use of a recorder for notes. Again, the child's listening to you and then taking notes at the same time, that just might be a little bit too much for them. Let them use a recorder to take the notes and then listen to it later at home. Use of the keyboard for writing and preferential classroom seating. And we'll get into that a little bit later into the webinar. Use the child's interest in classwork. As we discussed earlier, the child might have extreme restrictive interest. These are some of the things that some of my little and big friends are very interested in. Minecraft, Yo Gabba Gabba, and Thomas the Tank Engine. Minecraft is for a little older kids, but no doubt there's other kids in your class that enjoy this, and so it'll be beneficial for the whole class. In fact, you can Google using Minecraft in the classroom and get tons of articles about how teachers are incorporating this into their learning. Yo Gabba Gabba and Thomas also hold high interest in some kids with autism. The point being, use what interests them to grab their attention, make something more relatable to them, and work it into your lesson plan if possible. Use the general strength of kids with autism of being able to learn rote facts to their advantage. Many kids with autism are great with spelling and geography, history. Use these things to help them shine. They might have difficulties in other subjects, but they might be great in these other subjects where a lot of rote memorization is what you need. So use those things to help them feel good about themselves and let them shine. Okay, so now we're on to behavior in your classroom. Can something as simple as my own classroom setup or where the student is seated affect behavior? If you look at this classroom right here on the slide, it's very early, very bland, very sterile. The desks are all in rows. There's really nothing on the walls. It's probably maybe a college classroom. But let's look at a more realistic slide picture of maybe a classroom at your school. This might be a classroom from junior high or a high school room. The desks are also in rows. There's things on the wall, but there's a pretty good indication of where you're supposed to be looking, to the front there, the podium and the whiteboard. If I had a student here with autism, I most likely would put them at the front. If they were sitting in the back, I think that they would be distracted probably from what all the children in front of them were doing. It might be harder for them to pay attention. Let's go on to the next slide. This is obviously of a different age group, maybe preschoolers or early elementary. It's very organized. The tables and chairs are color-coded, so that will be easy for a child to always know where they were to be sitting. If you see there's some orange footprints there taped onto the floor, sometimes standing in line is very hard for a child with autism. They don't know where to have their body. They bang into the person in front or the person in back, or they're not standing in line. And these are clear indicators to them of where they need to line up. The shelves in the background there, they look pretty neat and pretty uncluttered. The whiteboard there, there's the one section of the whiteboard there that has pretty much looks like all of the information you'll need for the day, the calendar and the schedule. So that's a pretty good classroom, I would say, for a younger child with autism. The next slide, also probably younger children, maybe second or third grade. These are individual desks that are paired as tables. But again, there's the whiteboard there on the left side of your slide that looks like it has pretty much all the information for the day right there for the child to look at. It's organized, it's uncluttered. Now, I'm going to tell you that this next slide, before I show you, I'm going to apologize in advance if there's a slim chance that this is a photo of your classroom that you very proudly posted on the internet, because if I was a child with autism and I was in this classroom, I'm just going to say that I would be freaking out. I would not know where to be looking. I would not be able to focus on one thing in particular. I would not be able to pay attention to my teacher if she was standing up there, because I would be so distracted with everything else that's in the background. I don't know what I would select to play with because there's too many things out. I would be overwhelmed and I would be stressed, and I might even be overwhelmed and stressed if I was a typical child in this classroom, but this is just too much. There's just too much in this room to have any sense of order for a kid on the spectrum. Another example of a classroom, probably middle school or so, and these are arranged in long tables, pretty organized looking, but let's talk about room arrangement in particular. If you have a U-shaped room, I would put the child on an end and not in the middle of two people because I think it would be less distracting. I would possibly consider having a few desks out of the U, just as individual units, and not just the one for the kid on the spectrum, but maybe somebody else would prefer or do better in just an individual desk and not in part of the group. I would seat the child beside someone you think may be a good peer. Obviously, you don't want them sitting next to another child that's going to be a behavior issue or very distracting. And if you change your seating arrangement throughout the year, I would give ample warning to your child with autism. And I'd really consider, does his seat have to change? Is that going to benefit him in any way? It might not. Sensory considerations, the next column there. Think to yourself, knowing what you do about their different sensory systems, what may bother that student? Is there a loud vent? I really wouldn't sit them by the door. Is looking out the window, being distracted by things going on outside, the bright light from the window, is that going to be distracting? Can you have that student back turned to the window? And an automatic electric pencil sharpener, those are so loud. Are you going to have children walking to the pencil sharpener, sharpening their pencils throughout class? The rest of the class might not even hear the pencil sharpener after a couple weeks in school, but it might be extremely distracting and almost upsetting to a child with autism that has very sensitive hearing. Are the lights going to bother the child? Are there any physical accommodations you can make to help? Do they need a disc or a seat cushion on their chair? Could dimming the lights possibly affect their behavior, make it a little more calming? And, if you have a very high-functioning child with autism, you might even consider asking them ahead of time, privately, of course, where do you think would be a good place for you to sit? And they might be able to help you out themselves. Okay, so next slide, let's talk about the behaviors, challenging behaviors. Behaviors are usually present to do two things. First, gain attention. Second, avoiding a task or a person. And third, to gain control of the situation. Applied behavior analysis, or ABA, helps us understand the possible function of a behavior. Observation and ABC charts are the tools we use, and I'm going to give you some examples of those on the next slides. This is an example of an ABC chart, and A is an antecedent, so that is what happened before the bad behavior, all right? B is the behavior, what exactly the student is doing, and C is the consequence, okay? What consequence did the child receive from that behavior? And so here's just an example. I have the date and time there as the first column, and that is important because sometimes you can track a pattern to the behavior depending on the day and the time of the week. So keep that in mind. So let's just look at the behavior first. Joe throws his work to the floor. So what happened right before then? Well, you put the work on his desk, and he threw it to the floor. And the consequence was, maybe you're having a bad day, or you didn't have your coffee that morning. You say, you know what, Joe, go. You need to go to the counselor's office right now. So he leaves, and he goes to the counselor's office. Let's look at the next behavior. You're in the lunchroom. It's noon, and you see that Joe hits the guy next to him. Well, what happened right before then? Well, the friend took out some candy from his lunchbox. Joe hit him. What happens? Well, the friend feels bad, and he gives Joe the candy. Okay. Next example. You say, okay, Joe, it's time to get off the computer. Oh, he screams, and he starts biting his hand. So what's the consequence? What do? You say, okay, all right. You got 5 more minutes on the computer. All right? So taking this data, these are just examples, but taking this data, it might not help you immediately, right, in the situation, but it can help you in the long run when you go back and examine it, okay? So let's talk about the 3 reasons behind the challenging behaviors. The first one, gaining attention. And kids do that by using inappropriate actions or vocalizations. Example, yelling, throwing, pinching. Example from the ABC chart. Joe hitting his friend who had the candy. What do you need to do? You should provide an alternative appropriate behavior. Maybe that was the first thing Joe thought of. to let his friend know that he wanted some of the candy. So you need to teach these things. You can model him asking the friend or tapping the friend on the shoulder or using his text card if he can't really communicate. If he's yelling or banging his hand on the desk in class to gain your attention, again, we have to use some time to show him, model for him how you raise your hand instead of screaming or banging your desk. So you provide an alternative, appropriate behavior. The next behavior, avoidance. Examples of that, running away or ignoring. The example from the ABC chart, Joe threw his work on the floor. Okay, he didn't want to do the work. He threw it on the floor. Strategy, determine the reason for the avoidance and try to prevent it. You need to equip students with alternative methods. So if he doesn't want to do the work, he needs to know that he needs to do something other than throwing it on the floor. Okay, maybe he's feeling stressed out. That would be a good time for the break card. Joe, do you need a break? Then take your break, Or teaching him to say, I don't understand this, instead of throwing it on the floor. Next behavior, gaining control of a situation or an object. An example of this, screaming, snatching, tantruming. The example from the ABC chart, Joe's screaming when the computer time runs out because he didn't want to get off the computer. He wanted to gain control of that situation and stay on. What I would have done with Joe was to use a timer so that he can see, or some other visual aid to let him see, when this is out, you are done on the computer. You could use a verbal reminder. Joe, you have 1 more minute on the computer, so that it's not kind of a cold turkey, yep, your computer time's up. And use contingencies and rewards. So, Joe, if you get off the computer quietly, then you can get a token, or then you can get a sucker, or something like that. So let's go back now real quickly to the ABC chart, and let's look at the consequences that Joe got, and if these consequences were effective. So the first one, Joe throws his work to the floor. He wants to avoid doing that work. And you say, Joe, go to the counselor. Did he avoid doing the work? Yes, he did avoid doing the work. Now he gets to leave. So what could be an alternative? We talked about finding out why he throws it. Maybe he doesn't understand it. Giving him alternatives. So I would have him pick it up, first of all, and then, explain, do you not understand this? Are you getting overwhelmed? Do you need a break? All right? The second one, Joe hits his friend when he sees his friend take candy out of his lunchbox. That was possibly behavior to gain the attention of his friend, all right? So what happens? The friend gives Joe the candy. So what does that tell Joe? That tells Joe that every time he hits his friend, he might get the candy. There's a good chance he's going to get the candy. So what could you do here? Well, you could alter the antecedent. You could tell the friend, hey, if you don't want Joe hitting you every day, save that candy for after lunch, or don't take that candy out. That would extinguish Joe's hitting behavior in that instance. Or you could, again, teach Joe how to appropriately address the friend for the candy by tapping him on the shoulder or asking for the candy. The last one, you say, okay, Joe, your time to get off the computer, and he screams and bites his hand. He's having a tantrum, and you say, okay, all right, you can have 5 more minutes. So what did that behavior of the tantrum and screaming and biting his hand, what did that get Joe? It got him 5 more minutes on the computer, so that was effective for him, right? So that's not an effective consequence for modifying that behavior. The more effective consequence is to use a visual timer or give Joe a warning, or teach him that, if he gets off the computer quietly and nicely, that he'll get a reward instead. Okay, so you can really modify behaviors by doing that. Now, before we move on, I just want to say I understand when you're teaching that sometimes, and maybe even most of the time, you might not have the time to chart behaviors of kids. It might not be a realistic thing for you at all. But I really recommend, if you have a child in your class that is having recurring negative behaviors and you don't know what to do about it, and you don't have the time to observe and chart, you need to ask someone else, another person, to come in maybe even once or a few times to watch for you. Ideally, this will be a behavior analyst or a special ed consultant in your school, but if that just isn't realistic in your situation, ask an aide or a staff member or someone who maybe has a free period or a planning period or has a few minutes during that time, during your class, to just come in for 5 or 10 minutes and observe for you so you can try and get some information as to why the behavior is occurring. And that being said, also keep in mind that sometimes and some days you might not ever be able to figure out the behavior. Okay, it might be because the child isn't feeling well, or they were up all night, or they were in trouble. They got in trouble with the class right before yours. So there are going to be instances where you might not understand, but there will also be plenty of times when you can learn how to counteract negative behaviors with these strategies. All right, let's move on to social skills. As we already know, kids on the spectrum have difficulties with social interactions and social skills, but they're very important and continue to be so throughout life. I find that many parents, when their child is doing well academically, overlook poor social skills, and I do not think this is wise. We are expected to be socially competent in our society. So although a child with autism may have a normal or high IQ, they might graduate from high school, they might go on to college, and yes, kids with autism do go to college. They maybe even graduate from college with honors. If they haven't been taught social skills, they can't get through a job interview, they can't have appropriate phone conversations, they won't be successful in any job with any customer relations, and they won't have good coworker relations. So you see, without decent social skills, for many, it won't matter how smart they are or how well they did in school. They won't be able to be independent, which is the whole goal. And that's a shame because they probably worked very hard throughout school on their studies. So social skills should not be overlooked. They can be taught and improved upon. First here, find a good peer to pair up with your child. But be conscientious of who this peer is, all right? You want a child that's helpful and patient, kind of an old soul who enjoys doing this kind of thing. Make sure you explain to the peer what their role will be, helping and guiding, but not doing for the child. Number 2, have topic lunches. And what these are times away from the cafeteria once or twice a week when a small group of 3 to 4 students, or maybe even 1 to 2 to start, are selected to go somewhere quiet and eat their lunch and have a guided discussion by an adult, either a counselor or a teacher, about something in particular. Okay, this is easier for the child with autism. Number one, it's quiet. They might know the topic ahead of time, so they know what to say, or they've been able to think about what to say, or they maybe even practiced what to say. And it also lets the children get to know each other better. Peers are very important in the learning process. Research has shown that exposure to typical peers is important to kids on the spectrum. They absorb language and behaviors from their peers. Now, this can be a good thing or a bad thing. Our daughter is now in middle school, and she was telling me how much homework she had the other night. And at the end of her complaint, she ended her little rant with, and that really sucks. And I hate that word, and my mother has always hated that word, and I just really try not to use that word. Obviously, and of course with my children, I don't like it, but I had to chuckle to myself because I knew that was a word she had learned from her peers at school. So it's very important, peers are. Use social skills curriculums implemented by school counselors or outside professionals. There are some examples of the curriculum: Superflex, skill streaming, navigating the social world. They're all different books and curriculums, and they're for all different levels of kids, but they're very worthy of attention. You need to assess first who you're working with, what level they're at, and which curriculum might fit them best. But kids with autism need concrete explanations of the various social skills, and they need to be taught them. How can you include families? Having a child with autism can be a very isolating experience. Sometimes children are diagnosed at a very young age, and by the time they get to preschool or kindergarten, their families have already traveled a very long road with that child, and they have worked very hard, both the child and the family, to get where they are. If they're coming to a new school and they're being forthcoming with their diagnosis, which I always recommend to my families, it can be a very intimidating experience. You know, they're sitting in front of you, And they know all about autism, and they know that many people today still don't know very much about autism, and that many people have misconceptions about autism, and probably therefore misconceptions about their child. So what the parent is thinking is, I've got a great kid, please give him a chance. And what the professional might be thinking, what the administrator might be thinking is, oh, you know, you've got another kid with autism, another behavior problem, what are we going to do? So there's oftentimes a disconnect there. So please try and be open and supportive. Number 2, respect decisions made by parents. Sometimes parents of kids with autism try different things. There's a lot of different things out there, diets and vitamins and non-traditional therapies. And these are all done to help their children, and sometimes these things sound a little bit kooky to you. They might not be what you would do, and they might not have any scientific research behind them. But until you have a child that has a disorder to which there is no cure and nobody can tell you how they got it, you really have to respect the decisions made by the parents of those children. Number 3, suggest a special needs PTA. This came about in our school district here, although the parents in the district are all welcome and invited to join the regular PTA, or PTO, whatever you call it, the parent organization. One group of parents just felt like their needs or visions for their special needs students were not necessarily being met by the regular group, and so they started their own. And they work very closely with the regular PTA, and they're unified on a lot of things, but they also do their own things, and those parents have that community to belong to. And then last, be aware of autism support groups for your families, because they can be very helpful. So that is what I have today for you. I appreciate your time. I'd like to end with just one common saying in the autism community, and that is, if you've met one kid with autism, you've met one kid with autism. And that means that regardless of the fact that they have autism, each child is an individual with their own strengths and weaknesses, likes and dislikes, just like any other student you may have in your class. And if you take the time to get to know them, you can really learn how to help them succeed. So I thank you for listening, and Kathy, it's back to you.
Thank you, Kate. I've left up Kate's information on there, her contact information, and right now I'd like to ask Kate a few questions that we have received during the course of the information. One of them is, many parents don't want to see their child ever singled out as, quote, special. So how would it appear if they were to sit alone in a classroom where there are multiple group desks, and then the child has their own, which is better for the child, but the parent may have a problem with it?
Well, that's a good question, and there's always some parents are much more in sync with their child's disability and their child's learning style, and some parents aren't. It's difficult sometimes for some people to think of what's best for my child, but that's why I said if you can have not just the one desk, if there's a group setting, if you can have maybe 3, 4, 5 desks that aren't part of the group, and not just that one child's desk, I would think that would be a better option. You can always explain that you have seen, or maybe even, I know taking data again might not be a possibility, but you can explain, this is how your child listens and sits and behaves when he's sitting in his own desk, and show them, and then this is how your child behaves when he's at the group table. He's talking out of turn, he's fidgeting, he's not paying attention, he's dropping things on the floor. And so if you can provide some written proof to the parent that their child is learning better and behaving better in a more comfortable situation for that child, I think that would be a good option.
Excellent. We also have another question that we have a 3rd grade student that when stressed, they dig into their own fecal matter and they spread it on their hands and their face. What can we do to help this and prevent this?
That's just tough. Not knowing what the intellectual level of that child is. If it were a fairly high functioning child, and this is just kind of a compulsion they have, I might use maybe an authority figure like their pediatrician or the school nurse or someone like that to explain really why this is not good, why it's not safe, why it's not healthy for the child and for others around it, the germ factor, et cetera. So maybe some sort of explanation or even a video to explain, or a book to explain to the child why this isn't healthy so they can understand why. Oftentimes, though, like I said, if it's really truly a compulsion, there's no explanation will help that behavior, and you're going to have to, I would think, some possibly like physical barrier for the child to not be able to get into the mess and spread it. So I'm not sure what that would be, whether or not certain pants, a certain type of pants would be harder for her to get in there, or even a replacement behavior. And I don't know, you'd have to figure out what is it about that is pleasing to her or reinforcing to her, and maybe try and replace it with something else for her hands to be holding during the day, or if it's possibly connected to a certain time of the day or a certain class of the day or something where she's very uncomfortable, and then use that to replace it with something else, either some sort of sensory toy or sensory activity for her to kind of get over that urge.
Perfect. We've got a question that came in, and it seems to be a popular topic. Why is it that autistic children always seem to drop to the ground when it's just the most inappropriate time, and what can be done to stop that type of behavior?
Yeah, that is interesting, and it can really give your back a trauma. I've worked with kids that drop a lot. I'm not sure what purpose that behavior of dropping to the ground is satisfying. I think some kids, they're looking for almost like that fetal position. If they're stressed or overwhelmed or very excited, that they kind of curl up in a ball and kind of withdraw. And I think dropping is the natural first, step to getting there. They want to be they just want out. You just really have to analyze what's going on and what's going on at the time. And is it something, again, that you can alter? Is it something that sets them off? Can you alter what goes on before they drop? Or can you give them warning? Is it because they're not expecting something and all of a sudden you say, we're going here, and maybe they don't like going there? It's so hard to determine why they drop. And again, you might not ever be able to determine why they drop, but you can deter it with something negative, or you can try and anticipate it and maybe reward them with not dropping. It's really all about the behavior and trying to modify it either with your antecedent, with what happens beforehand, or with the consequence of what happens after they drop. And I know that's not answering specifically, but, there's just all different instances of when they could do the dropping, and it all depends on what purpose that's serving for them.
I agree. We at Keenan do a lot of back injury prevention training for the special ed staff, and one of the things we always ask the staff is if they're dropping, are they in the classroom and are they safe? If that's the case, we could try distracting them, or we can just let them drop and calm themselves down, and then they'll get right back up and continue with the group. That will kind of help save their back.
Yes, ignoring sometimes is very powerful. They might be doing it to gain attention, So you're right, ignoring, and if they're safe, ignoring it might be a great deterrent.
Right. All right, we've got just a couple more questions. One of them is, I have a boy in my class with high-functioning autism who gets very upset whenever any of his classmates are upset, even if he is fine. What can we do about this?
I don't think that's that uncommon. In fact, I've had that going on recently, and if it's any classmate, that's harder. A lot of the times, kids with autism, again, they don't understand social interactions, and they don't understand emotions, and they don't know how to respond to particular emotions. That all ties in with their difficulties with social interactions. In that case, if it's with any child, I think there needs to be some time set aside with your student with autism to really explain and learn about emotions and how you should react and what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. And then, of course, rewarding when your child with autism at the slightest time when he does react appropriately, or if he doesn't get upset when someone else is upset, or maybe even teaching him to, if it's appropriate, ask, are you okay? What's wrong? Sometimes the child with autism doesn't know what to do with themselves. It's just very upsetting to them. My particular situation, there's a little girl that had autism, and another boy in the class who she just really liked, who was also a behavior issue, not necessarily, he did not have autism, but he had some behavior issues. And every time he would have an outburst or get in trouble or start crying, she would start crying and getting very upset, and she wanted to be put in timeout when he was in timeout. And I actually pulled the boy aside one day and I said, do you see what you do to Susie when you get in trouble and when you get upset? You hurt her feelings and you make her upset too. She's crying now, and she's doing it because she feels bad for you. Do you see what happens? And I said, can you help me? Can you help me help Susie by trying to control yourself a little bit better? Because when you get upset, then she gets upset, and then the entire rest of the class is ruined. So can you be on my team? Can you help me? And I honestly say, I'm going to say I was surprised and I was amazed, but he did. It really affected his behavior. And when he would start to get upset, sometimes I would just point over to her, and he would see that she was getting upset, and he would pull it together. Not all the time, but a lot of the times he did. He pulled it together, and it was a win-win situation.
That's excellent advice. We've got one last question. How do you go about explaining the behavior of a student with autism to their typical peers in the classroom?
Well, there's obviously privacy issues that come into play. Some parents are very open about it. Some parents are not. But if they're open about it, and they even if the parent wants to come in and talk about it, sometimes I will say that if children are high functioning enough, and again with their parents' consent and everyone being on board, sometimes the child gets to a point in their life and they have a good enough understanding that they want to explain it to their peers. And I just think that's great. I really do. If that's not the case, though, I just like to take students, and without using the word autism, I like to explain with, of course, the student not in the room, that, Joey was born differently, and let's talk about something. I have everybody go through the room and talk about something that they do well, that they're proud of something that they do, and they do it well, and it's easy for them. So everybody comes up with something, and then we go through the room again, and I ask, what is something that you do not do well, that you have a very hard time with? Tell me about that. And everybody has one of those things as well. And then I work the student in. I say, Joey was born a little bit differently, and he does all these things well. He knows all your birthdays, and he knows the capitals of every single state here in the United States. And he does this and he does that. Here are some things that Joey has a really hard time with. And it might sound strange to you that he has a hard time saying good morning to you, or that he has a hard time keeping his hands still, or that sometimes he makes noises in class. But this is how he is, and this is the things he struggles with. And I'd like for you to be understanding and kind and compassionate, and we can all try and work together on the things that all of us are not good at and that we need to improve. And I just think making it a team environment and having everyone on board is the best way to explain it.
Perfect. Sounds great. Well, I do appreciate you taking the time to join us this morning. I want to remind everyone that this webinar has been recorded, and it is available for you to upload through your Policy Builder feature in your Keen and Safe Schools program. once it's been uploaded, you can assign this course out and this actual whole entire webinar to every one of your classroom teachers or all of your special ed staff. We also have quite a few resources on our Keenan's Special Ed Resource Center on autism and many of the other topics in special education. We've got flyers on back injury prevention, how to lift, how to transfer. But this course was especially important this morning on handling the issues and the behaviors that arise with autism. Kate, I want to thank you so much for taking your time to join us this morning. We appreciate your wonderful expertise in the area.
Thank you very much, Kathy.
All right. Take care, everyone. Thank you for joining.